France, September 1944. The war has turned. The thunder of artillery echoes across the Norman countryside, fading into the mist of smoke and diesel. In a makeshift field camp, American soldiers rest beside their half-tracks, mud-streaked, exhausted, yet laughing. A generator hums softly nearby, powering a boxy machine that hisses and whirs. The air smells faintly of oil, and something impossibly sweet. A German prisoner, barely 20, stares in silence. His uniform is torn, his face thin from months of rationed bread and ersatz coffee. Before him, an American corporal hands another man a tin bowl filled with ice cream, pale white, melting fast in the autumn air. The prisoner blinks, thinking it a hallucination. Ice cream? At the front? Moments later, he watches another soldier peel an orange, its bright scent cutting through the stench of war. He lowers his gaze, whispering to himself in disbelief. Even at the front, they live like kings. He does not yet realize. This, more than any weapon, is what the Allies have mastered. By the middle of 1943, the Second World War had become a test of endurance. The battles were no longer just fought with bullets and bravery. They were fought with fuel, food, and freight. For the United States, entering the war after Pearl Harbor was not just a military awakening, it was an industrial awakening. Within months, a nation once reeling from the Great Depression became a colossal factory of war. Assembly lines in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Chicago roared day and night, building not only tanks and planes, but also the invisible arteries that would keep millions of men fed and moving. The U.S. Quartermaster Corps, often overlooked in stories of heroism, became the beating heart of this new kind of warfare. Behind every division advancing through mud and blood stood hundreds of trucks, warehouses, and cooks, ensuring soldiers not only survived, but ate well. Fresh fruit, hot coffee, real bread, even ice cream. These weren't luxuries. They were strategy. To understand how this came to be, we must go back to a concept foreign to most wartime armies: comfort as combat readiness. American generals, from Eisenhower down to field officers, understood that morale wasn't just a feeling. It was a measurable force multiplier. A soldier who ate well fought longer, thought clearer, and endured horror with steadier hands. On the Western Front, this philosophy met the full machinery of American industry. By 1944, supply depots stretched from the beaches of Normandy to the banks of the Seine. Entire divisions were dedicated not to fighting, but to moving. The Red Ball Express, a lifeline of thousands of trucks and African-American drivers who carried everything from ammunition to canned peaches, 24 hours a day. Each convoy was a gamble. Roads were cratered. Bridges were gone. German planes hunted overhead. Yet the flow never stopped. A single American infantryman consumed nearly 9 pounds of supplies a day. Food, fuel, water, clothing, ammunition, compared to roughly 4 pounds for his German counterpart. The difference wasn't just statistical, it was psychological. On the other side of the lines, German soldiers wrote in letters and diaries about their rations dwindling. Ersatz coffee, dried turnips, black bread stretched with sawdust, all while the enemy seemed to possess a bottomless reserve. When captured, many POWs described the first shock of seeing American mess tents, boxes labeled California oranges, Hershey chocolate, ice cream mix, keep cold. Some thought it propaganda. Others thought it was simply impossible. But it was real, and it represented something far greater. The American logistical machine wasn't just a support system, it was a weapon. It allowed the U.S. Army to move faster than its enemies, recover quicker, and sustain offensives that would have starved any other army. By 1944, the ability to eat ice cream at the front wasn't a sign of arrogance. It was proof of industrial superiority. Every spoonful of sweetness in a war zone whispered the same truth. The United States could do what Germany could not: bring civilization to the battlefield. Yet this abundance was not without cost. It demanded a scale of coordination unseen in history. Fuel lines snaked across continents, supply depots grew into cities, and still, the men at the tip of the spear depended on fragile roads and human endurance. As the front lines moved eastward and the German army began its desperate retreats, the contrast between deprivation and plenty grew starker. One side fought to survive, the other fought while still living. That divide would become one of the I most misunderstood and most revealing contrasts of the entire war. By late 1944, the German war machine was starving. What had once been a lightning-fast force, fueled by precision, order, and national will, was now limping through mud and snow, scraping together the remnants of a war economy stretched beyond reason. The shortages began years earlier. When Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in 1941, the Wehrmacht relied heavily on plunder. Soviet grain, French cattle, and occupied labor kept the army fed, but only for a time. As Allied bombers turned German cities into rubble and submarines choked under the weight of Atlantic blockades, the Empire's supply arteries began to collapse. At home, ration cards became a way of life. Butter, sugar, and meat were reduced to fractions of what the civilian population once knew. Coffee disappeared, replaced by roasted barley or acorns. Chocolate was a childhood memory. Cigarettes became a form of currency. Soldiers at the front felt this deprivation most acutely. A typical German ration by 1944 contained stale bread, a thin soup, and a slice of sausage. If they were lucky, the rest came from what could be scavenged, stolen, or traded. It was an army still capable of ferocity, but not comfort. And comfort, in war, is the difference between endurance and despair. Letters from the Eastern Front described hunger as a constant companion. One soldier wrote to his wife in 1943, "The Americans have food from heaven. We have nothing left to chew but hope." By the time these men were captured on the Western Front a year later, their disbelief at American abundance bordered on awe. German POW camps in France and Belgium became silent theaters of comparison. Prisoners watched as American cooks handed out trays of hot food: real meat, mashed potatoes, milk. They saw GIs throw away crusts of bread that a German family might have saved for days. In the words of a German lieutenant captured near St. Lo, "I realized then that we had already lost, not to their tanks, but to their tables." For the Americans, it wasn't arrogance. It was logistics, discipline, and industrial reach. For the Germans, it was a humiliating experience. The propaganda of the Third Reich had told them that Allied armies were decadent, undisciplined, incapable of hardship. Yet in captivity, they saw the opposite. A military system so efficient it could deliver ice cream to a foxhole. German officers wrote post-war reports marveling at what they called the material miracles of the U.S. Army. One compared it to a moving city of metal, powered by sugar and gasoline. Another observed that the enemy fights as a machine that eats like a man, not the other way around. This cultural shock ran deeper than comfort. It touched something existential. a recognition that industrial democracy had outperformed dictatorship. While German soldiers marched on empty stomachs and nationalist pride, their American counterparts marched on calories and confidence. One side was fueled by ideology, the other by infrastructure. By 1945, the contrast was total. As the Allies pushed into Germany itself, American troops ate fresh fruit shipped from North Africa, eggs from England, milk from Normandy farms, and, when time allowed, ice cream churned in mobile units mounted on trucks. Meanwhile, in collapsing German cities, civilians boiled grass for soup. This imbalance of plenty and hunger, comfort and deprivation, was not incidental. It was the defining psychological gap of the late war, a gap that made German surrender not only inevitable, but comprehensible. To understand how such abundance reached the front lines, we must look deeper into the systems, people, and philosophies that made the American soldier's ice cream possible in a world consumed by fire. For soldiers, war reduces life to its barest elements: hunger, fear, exhaustion. Every hot meal becomes an act of mercy. Every sweet bite, a memory of home. American troops, often young men barely out of high school, found small miracles in their rations. The K-ration, designed by physiologist Ansel Keys, was compact, calculated, and efficient. It provided roughly 2,800 calories a day. Not gourmet by any means, but balanced, predictable, and, most importantly, sufficient. Inside each box were symbols of civilization: a pack of cigarettes, a packet of sugar, a piece of chewing gum, sometimes even a small tin of fruit or chocolate. For men living in trenches and shattered villages, these were reminders that they hadn't been forgotten by the world beyond the front. German POWs, many of whom had survived on black bread and ersatz coffee, could scarcely believe it. To them, the presence of abundance amid chaos felt almost sacrilegious. One former German infantryman recalled decades later, "We fought like wolves, but they lived like men." That statement captures the essence of the human divide. The American soldier fought within a system that valued his survival, not only as a fighter, but as a person. Comfort was not decadence. It was a recognition of worth, and that worth became a weapon. It told every man wearing the U.S. uniform, "You matter enough to be fed well." That belief sustained morale as effectively as ammunition sustained firepower. The U.S. Army's attention to comfort wasn't sentimental, it was strategic. Every calorie, every hot meal, every cigarette ration was part of a larger equation. Endurance equals victory. By 1944, the U.S. Army's field manuals explicitly linked nutrition to combat efficiency. A fatigued, hungry soldier, it noted, was more likely to make errors, desert, or succumb to illness. The Quartermaster Corps began conducting nutritional studies, measuring how rations affected alertness, stamina, and decision-making. The findings were clear. Well-fed soldiers fought longer and recovered faster. In the European theater, where long marches and brutal winters tested endurance, American units maintained consistent food supply lines. When weather grounded planes or destroyed bridges, engineers improvised field kitchens, sometimes running on captured German stoves or converted jeeps. The difference this made was visible on the battlefield. While German units often faltered from fatigue and malnutrition, U.S. divisions maintained fighting strength. Commanders like General George S. Patton enforced strict standards for mess discipline. Soldiers were to be fed, rested, and ready, no matter the circumstances. Patton once wrote, "I do not to trivide enterbine treaturance treven." A hungry army is a defeated army. An army that eats wins. He wasn't being poetic. He was describing a doctrine. During the Ardennes offensive, While German troops relied on dwindling reserves and horse-drawn wagons, American logistics ensured hot meals even amid retreat. Cooks served stew under shell fire. Field supply trucks brought bread and coffee to frozen foxholes. To the German soldier who captured a glimpse of this, it looked like sorcery, but it was science and organization. In the quiet hours of the front, when men measured life in cigarettes and canned meat, this steady stream of nourishment became a lifeline, not just of the body, but of the mind. Behind every meal lay machinery, an invisible network of engineering brilliance. The Americans didn't just bring food, they brought the technology to preserve it. Portable refrigeration units, mobile bakeries, field sterilizers, and ice cream-making trucks transformed logistics into an industrial ballet. In 1944, the U.S. Army's mobile ice cream unit became legend. Mounted on a 2.5-ton truck, powered by a generator, it could produce 10 gallons of ice cream every hour. The Navy followed suit, installing ice cream machines aboard aircraft carriers and submarines. At first glance, it seemed absurd, frozen dessert amid artillery and death. Yet it served a profound purpose. Ice cream wasn't only about taste. It was about morale, nostalgia, and home. It reminded soldiers of what they were fighting for. Refrigeration also revolutionized preservation. Instead of salted or canned meat, soldiers could eat fresh produce and dairy for the first time in modern warfare. By maintaining a cold chain from ship to shore to front, the U.S. military achieved what no other army had: a perishable supply line in a total war zone. It required vast energy, fuel, and coordination. Every ice cream cone was the result of a global network. Sugar from Cuba, milk from Wisconsin, steel from Pittsburgh, refrigeration gas from DuPont, diesel from Texas. In essence, a simple bowl of ice cream symbolized the sum of the American war economy. For the German observer, whose army was still relying on horse-drawn wagons and field ovens, it was unimaginable. For historians, it remains one of the quiet triumphs of the modern age, the moment when logistics ceased to be a backroom function and became the frontline advantage. The human, tactical, and technological sides were inseparable. Together, they created a soldier who could fight hard, yet remain human in inhuman conditions. And this web of efficiency was guided by leaders who understood something most dictators never could: that the will to fight comes not from orders, but from the belief that one's life matters. To understand how American soldiers ended up eating fresh fruit and ice cream on the front lines, one must look not at the cooks or the trucks, but at the minds that ordered them. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, believed that logistics was not an afterthought, but the foundation of victory. "Battles are won and lost in the rear," he said, and he meant it literally. Under his command, the U.S. Army built a doctrine of sustainment. His staff understood that feeding, clothing, and sheltering men was as essential as arming them. Eisenhower often toured supply depots personally, ensuring that lines of communication were efficient, that rations were adequate, that the small comforts were never neglected. General George S. Patton, known for his ferocity and discipline, seemed the opposite in temperament, yet he shared the same core belief. To him, morale was the blood of combat. His obsession with hygiene, hot food, and proper rest wasn't softness. It was a reflection of precision. "Fatigue makes cowards of us all," he warned. A well-fed army, to Patton, was an unstoppable machine. Both men grasped a truth that Germany's generals, constrained by ideology and resource collapse, often ignored: a soldier's welfare was a strategic asset. While Hitler issued fanatical orders and ignored logistical reality, Eisenhower and Patton treated logistics as the invisible weapon of democracy, the power of planning, discipline, and care. Thus, when a German prisoner in 1944 saw an American eating ice cream, he wasn't witnessing luxury. He was witnessing leadership, the culmination of policies designed to humanize war even amid its savagery. In contrast, the German command viewed comfort as weakness. From the outset, Nazi ideology glorified hardship. The perfect soldier was stoic, indifferent to pain, unspoiled by comfort. Propaganda praised the Spartan virtues of simplicity and endurance. To eat well, to seek comfort, was to invite moral decay. But this ideal met the crushing weight of reality. By 1944, the German soldier's hardship was not a badge of honor. It was a symptom of collapse. The Wehrmacht had begun the war with remarkable efficiency. But as territories expanded, its logistics broke under the strain. Roads were inadequate, fuel scarce, trucks diverted to the Eastern Front. By the time of the Normandy invasion, German forces in France relied on horse-drawn wagons for more than 60% of their transport. When the Wehrmacht encountered the U.S. Army's mechanized supply convoys, the endless Red Ball Express, roaring through the French countryside, it was like glimpsing the future. Captured, German officers were stunned. They noted how the Americans seemed able to bring an entire nation behind every rifle. They admired, sometimes bitterly, the abundance of spare parts, tires, food, and medicine. One Luftwaffe report even described American logistics as a second front, one that cannot be bombed. Yet within the German officer corps, this realization came too late. Years of indoctrination had equated endurance with strength. The result was tragic. Soldiers deprived of rest, nourishment, and even hope. Men who fought heroically, but hopelessly. When those same soldiers became POWs, their captors' abundance forced a painful reckoning. They were not beaten by moral weakness. They were beaten by an enemy who had learned that care is power. There is a quiet irony in the story of ice cream at the front. While cities burned, while Europe starved, an American soldier could savor a taste of home. It is both extraordinary and unsettling. War is always unequal, but rarely had the imbalance been so profound. On one side, Allied convoys brought oranges and milk across oceans. On the other, German civilians foraged for dandelions and sawdust bread. Historians have debated the morality of this contrast. Was it right to enjoy comfort while the continent suffered? The answer lies in understanding what that comfort symbolized. It wasn't decadence. It was faith in normalcy. For American soldiers, eating ice cream amid war wasn't a celebration. It was an act of defiance. It meant that civilization could survive even in hell, that humanity could persist when surrounded by ruin. This mindset had moral power. It wasn't just the enemy's weapons the U.S. sought to overcome, but the ideology that glorified suffering. Every hot meal, every clean uniform, every simple act of care undermined that ideology. To feed a soldier well was to affirm life in a world of death. Yet, for all its virtue, abundance also carried its shadow. It reminded the defeated of their ruin. German POWs described humiliation, envy, and disbelief in equal measure. Some wondered if the American soldier's comfort was proof of divine favor. Others saw it as the ultimate proof of industrial dominance, a sign that the future belonged to those who could organize, not merely endure. In the ruins of the Reich, that lesson would take root. The post-war German recovery, the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle, would later draw deeply from this revelation, that the strength of a nation lies not only in its armies, but in its ability to sustain human dignity. The leadership that fed its men, the enemy that starved its own, and the morality that emerged between them, all converged on a single truth. War is not only a struggle of weapons, but of values. That truth would reach its most decisive expression in the winter of 1944-45, when food, fuel, and faith collided in the last great gamble of Hitler's army. August 1944, northern France. The German army was in retreat, disorganized, desperate, and half-starved. Behind them, the Allied advance surged forward like a tidal wave, propelled not just by courage, but by supply. In the wake of the Normandy breakout, the U.S. First and Third Armies pushed eastward faster than any commander had dared imagine. But this speed created a new kind of danger. The faster they moved, the more they risked outrunning their supplies. Fuel, food, ammunition, the lifeblood of war, had to flow faster than ever before. And so, from this crisis, arose one of the most remarkable achievements of the Second World War, the Red Ball Express. A convoy system unlike anything seen before, it was a 24-hour operation linking the beaches of Normandy to the advancing front lines. Thousands of trucks, manned primarily by African-American drivers, thundered across France in endless columns. Each truck bore the Red Ball insignia, a symbol of speed and priority. They carried everything: canned rations, milk, fruit, cigarettes, medical supplies, and, yes, ice cream mix. It was a living artery, pumping the essence of American industry directly into the battlefield. Every gallon of fuel and every crate of food that reached the front was a tactical victory. Every delay, a potential disaster. The conditions were brutal. Roads were cratered and narrow. Rain turned fields into swamps. Drivers slept only in short bursts, eating cold rations behind the wheel. German aircraft occasionally strafed convoys, but the greatest enemy was exhaustion. And yet, the convoys never stopped. By mid-September, the Red Ball Express was delivering 12,000 tons of supplies every day. In Eisenhower's headquarters, logistics officers referred to it as the Steel River. To the soldiers at the front, it was salvation. When supplies arrived, morale rose instantly. Soldiers who had gone days on hard bread and cold coffee suddenly found themselves with fresh eggs, fruit, and hot chow. Some divisions even received the ice cream they had heard rumors about, served from field kitchens running on portable generators. In moments like these, the American soldier realized something profound. They weren't just fighting a war, they were being carried by a nation that refused to let them go hungry. German prisoners taken during this time wrote later of their astonishment. "We thought they would falter once away from the ports," one captured Feldwebel recalled. But instead, their supplies followed them like shadows. Others spoke of the sensory shock, the smell of oranges, the gleam of metal containers, the laughter of men eating pie and drinking real coffee near the sound of distant guns. To the Germans, these sights were more demoralizing than defeat itself. To the Americans, they were proof of what they called total support. The Red Ball Express not only fed men, it fed momentum. It allowed the Allies to maintain relentless pressure on the retreating Wehrmacht, giving them no time to regroup. Armies that, by all logic, should have been halted by logistics, continued forward through sheer organizational force. Each truckload of food and comfort became an extension of national will, a reminder that democracy could be as efficient as dictatorship, and infinitely more humane. General Patton, whose Third Army depended entirely on the Express, famously said, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks gotta have gas." He wasn't joking. His entire advance risked collapse without it. Yet the convoys kept pace, proving that supply, not heroism, was often the deciding factor. It was here, in the ruins of France, that the full contrast between American abundance and German desperation was laid bare. One army advanced on a sea of fuel and food. The other retreated through hunger and exhaustion. By autumn, the pattern was unmistakable. The Allies were not only winning battles, they were outfeeding the enemy. In POW camps filling across Normandy and Belgium, German captives marveled at what they saw. They had fought armies before, but never one that could build a restaurant on wheels. A captured German sergeant summed it up in his interrogation report. "We fought against machines, but your machines fed you. Ours devoured us." That statement, more than any statistic, revealed the truth of modern warfare. Victory was not only forged in factories or fought in fields, it was served, one meal at a time. And yet, as the Allies pressed toward Germany, this great logistical triumph would soon meet its greatest test: a brutal winter counterattack that would turn abundance into desperation once more. December 16, 1944. Ardennes Forest. The snow falls quietly, covering the dark trees of Belgium like a burial shroud. American troops, scattered along the frozen front, sip coffee from tin cups and stamp their boots for warmth. The war, they believe, is almost over. Then the silence explodes. The German army, thought to be broken, unleashes its final counterattack, the Battle of the Bulge. Panzers roar from the fog. Infantry surge through the snow. Allied lines shatter under the sudden storm of steel. For weeks, the war that seemed won teeters on the edge of chaos once again. But beneath the gunfire and panic lies another battle. Invisible, relentless, decisive. The battle of supply. When the offensive begins, the Germans possess one irreplaceable advantage: surprise. But they also carry one fatal weakness: they have no fuel. Hitler's gamble is desperate. His armies are ordered to seize Allied fuel dumps as they advance. Every Panzer Division's fate depends not on victory in combat, but on the ability to steal gasoline. As one German tank commander later confessed, "We had ammunition, we had courage, but we were hungry, and our tanks were thirsty." On the American side, chaos reigns at first. Entire units are cut off, convoys ambushed, supply depots captured. Soldiers retreat through snow, abandoning trucks and rations to the advancing Germans. But the U.S. logistical machine, vast, flexible, and decentralized, adapts with astonishing speed. Within days, quartermasters reroute supply lines, engineers build alternate roads, and truck convoys brave freezing nights to reach surrounded units. Fuel, food, ammunition, all flow again. One of the most remarkable efforts occurs in Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division is encircled by German forces. For days, the men endure cold and hunger, their supplies dwindling. Then on December 23rd, the skies clear, and C-47s thunder overhead, parachuting crates of food, ammunition, and even medical supplies into the besieged town. Among them, packed in insulated containers, are small luxuries: chocolate, cigarettes, and tinned fruit, tiny reminders of home falling from the heavens. For the soldiers of Bastogne, freezing and exhausted, those drops are more than sustenance. They are hope itself. Meanwhile, on the German side, the illusion of strength collapses. Their supply lines stretch thin, trucks run out of fuel, horses freeze on forest roads. Infantry steal food from civilians. Tank crews abandon vehicles when gasoline runs out. German diaries from the Ardennes reveal the despair beneath the snow. One entry reads, "We took an American truck full of food, oranges, meat, cakes. Our men wept when they saw it." Another, from a captain near St. Vith, "The enemy eats like kings. We eat frost." The contrast is no longer symbolic. It is catastrophic. Entire German divisions grind to a halt, not from battle losses, but starvation and fuel exhaustion. As the American counterattack begins in January, the tide turns irreversibly. Well-fed, well-equipped, and constantly resupplied, Allied troops retake ground inch by inch. The Red Ball Express, now rerouted for winter conditions, surges again. Thousands of trucks grinding through snow to deliver warmth and victory. By mid-January 1945, the Ardennes offensive collapses. German commanders order retreat. Thousands surrender. Among them are soldiers so weak they can barely stand, their rations long gone. Captured officers stare at American supply dumps. Rows of food, crates of oranges, tanks refueled and gleaming under the frost. They whisper in disbelief, some bitterly, others with quiet admiration. It is in these final weeks that the psychological war ends. The myth of the invincible, ascetic German soldier, the one who fights on discipline alone, dies here, in the frozen forests, outlasted by an enemy who knew that care and comfort were not weaknesses, but strength. When spring arrives, the truth is impossible to deny. The German army is finished, not only beaten in combat, but starved into submission, and the American soldier, who ate fruit and ice cream at the front, has proven something extraordinary, that modern war belongs to those who can feed, fuel, and sustain humanity amid destruction. In one of the final German POW interrogations after the Bulge, a captured officer summed it up with haunting clarity. "You Americans fight a rich man's war, but with the heart of a poor man." That paradox, abundance serving endurance, comfort sustaining courage, became the quiet signature of America's triumph. The ice cream trucks and chocolate rations that once seemed frivolous had, in truth, been instruments of victory. They had carried not indulgence, but resolve, the faith that civilization itself must never go hungry. And as Europe lay in ruins, that same logistical will would soon turn from war to rebuilding, feeding not armies, but nations. May 1945. The war in Europe ends. In towns across Germany, the sound of surrender is not silence, but hunger. Rail lines lie twisted. Cities are hollow shells. Civilians wander through ruins searching for food that no longer exists. In some regions, daily rations drop below 1,000 calories per person. The slow starvation of an entire nation. And yet, as American convoys roll eastward, not in conquest, but in relief, the same trucks that once delivered bullets and ice cream now carry bread and milk. The soldiers who had once fed themselves now feed their enemies. This is the paradox of victory. The same logistical empire that crushed Germany now becomes its salvation. In the weeks following surrender, millions of German prisoners flood into Allied custody. For many, captivity is the first time in years they experience true nourishment. POW camps in France, Belgium, and England become microcosms of two civilizations. American guards distribute rations that include canned meat, vegetables, fruit, and milk. The prisoners, gaunt and weary, stare at their plates as if they are part of some strange dream. A former Wehrmacht sergeant wrote years later, "They gave us food before they gave us questions. I thought it was a trick. It was not." For the first time, many German soldiers realized the depth of the gulf that had separated the two armies. They had fought believing in the discipline of hardship and been defeated by the power of compassion wrapped in organization. The U.S. Army, guided by a logistical doctrine forged in total war, begins applying that same precision to humanitarian relief. The Quartermaster Corps, which had once supplied millions of troops across Europe, now orchestrates food distribution to entire nations. Grain from Kansas, sugar from Louisiana, powdered milk from Wisconsin, all flow once more across the Atlantic. This time not for soldiers, but for civilians. This transformation marks the birth of a new kind of warfare, the battle against hunger itself. In towns like Aachen, Cologne, and Munich, American soldiers set up field kitchens to feed German children. The same mess halls that had nourished the conquerors now feed the conquered. Photographs from 1945 show long lines of civilians waiting patiently for soup ladled from steel pots bearing U.S. Army markings. For many Germans, these moments become the first glimmers of post-war humanity, proof that the victors, though powerful, were not cruel. The symbolism is profound. The ice cream, the fruit, the abundance that once humiliated the enemy now becomes the first bridge to peace. Historians later called it the logistics of mercy. It was more than policy. It was moral philosophy made tangible. The belief that the power to destroy must also carry the duty to rebuild. Eisenhower himself, now the supreme military governor of occupied Germany, insists on feeding the population to prevent famine and unrest. His logistical officers repurpose wartime networks into relief routes. What was once the Red Ball Express becomes, in spirit, a humanitarian artery. This continuity of care leaves a deep impression on German POWs and civilians alike. Yet intrigued, post-war interviews, many described the shock of being treated as human again by the very soldiers they had been told were decadent and weak. One prisoner, a former SS officer, admitted in 1947, "We believed we were stronger because we suffered, but they were stronger because they refused to." Such testimonies spread quietly through the ruins of Europe, shaping a new perception of power. It was not the iron fist that defined the future, but the open hand. As the war faded into memory, a new war began, the war to feed, rebuild, and restore. And once again, the United States wielded its most formidable weapon, the ability to deliver. From the trenches of Normandy to the soup lines of 1945 Germany, the story remained the same. Those who could feed life amid destruction held the final word. And that word was not victory. It was continuity. The years following victory revealed a truth the battlefield had only hinted at. Logistics was destiny. By 1946, the same networks that had carried ice cream and ammunition across Europe were transformed into arteries of reconstruction. Warehouses once filled with weapons now stored wheat and machinery. Trains that had hauled tanks now pulled plows, steel, and bread. The Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, became the peacetime echo of the Red Ball Express, an operation not of war, but of nourishment. Its goal was simple yet monumental: rebuild a starving continent before despair could give rise to another tyranny. Billions of dollars in aid, food, fuel, equipment, raw materials flowed from America to Europe. Ships crossed the Atlantic, carrying the same promise the GIs once brought ashore: "We will not let civilization starve." For many Germans, this was the final confirmation of something they had first glimpsed as POWs, that American abundance was not greed, but philosophy. The belief that strength must serve life, not dominate it. The moral weight of this transformation was immense. Other empires had conquered. America supplied. Factories in Detroit retooled for tractors instead of tanks. The Quartermaster Corps became the logistical model for global relief agencies. Even the Army's mobile refrigeration units, Those humble machines that had once churned ice cream for soldiers found civilian uses in post-war Europe, preserving food for millions. In a sense, the ice cream machine became a metaphor for the American century. Technology in service of morale, industry in service of humanity. The contrast with the defeated Axis could not have been sharper. Where Nazi Germany had built its power on plunder and fear, the United States built its post-war order on distribution. Trucks, ships, and rails, the same triad that had carried victory, now carried peace. This shift changed not only Europe, but warfare itself. Future generations of military planners studied World War II not just for its battles, but for its logistics. The lesson was clear: control the supply, and you control the outcome. But another lesson emerged, quieter and deeper. Feed the world, and you control its faith. The psychological residue of that lesson lingered for decades. German veterans who had once mocked American comfort came to admire it. They spoke of a kind of warfare that seemed almost compassionate, a system that cared for its own even amid carnage. In the 1950s, as West Germany rebuilt under American aid, former POWs helped design new industries modeled after what they had seen in captivity. Efficiency, mass production, attention to human welfare. The economic miracle that followed was, in part, the child of logistical enlightenment. For the United States, meanwhile, logistics became identity. Every humanitarian mission, every global deployment, every relief effort carried the shadow of the Red Ball Express. The lesson of the ice cream at the front became an unspoken creed. No soldier, no ally, no nation should ever go hungry under the American flag. By the time the 20th century reached its midpoint, the U.S. Army's supply doctrine had become the blueprint for modern global trade. Container shipping, standardized logistics, refrigerated transport, all born from the same wartime necessity that once made soldiers smile in foxholes. The battlefield that once defined destruction had, in its aftermath, defined abundance, and in that abundance, a new kind of power was born. Not the power to conquer, but the power to sustain. From the ruins of Europe, a line could be drawn straight back to a French field in 1944, where a German prisoner stared in disbelief as an American soldier peeled an orange and scooped a spoonful of melting ice cream. That moment, quiet and almost absurd amid war, captured everything the next century would become: industrial strength, human empathy, civilization refusing to surrender its sweetness, even to chaos. The guns had fallen silent, but the machinery of mercy rolled on. From Normandy's beaches to Berlin's ruins, from battle supply lines to food convoys of peace. And in that relentless movement, history itself seemed to whisper. The true victory was not in what was destroyed, but in what was delivered. War reveals what a civilization truly values. For Germany, it was discipline, obedience, and endurance. For America, it was supply, comfort, and the sanctity of the individual life. At first glance, those ideals seem worlds apart. Yet on the battlefields of Europe, one proved stronger than the other. Because in the end, the war was not only fought with tanks or guns, it was fought with care. A soldier who could eat, rest, and dream was a soldier who could keep fighting. An army that fed its men did not simply maintain strength. It preserved humanity, and in a world torn apart by ideology and hate, that preservation was revolutionary. When German prisoners saw Americans eating fruit and ice cream at the front, they weren't just witnessing luxury, they were witnessing a civilization's belief system made visible. The United States had turned its factories into instruments of nourishment. It had made compassion logistical and efficiency moral. That was the quiet secret of Allied victory. Not just firepower, but faith in abundance. The war's legacy would echo far beyond Europe. Every truck convoy delivering aid, every relief effort after disaster, every humanitarian airlift, all trace their lineage to the quartermaster trucks that once rumbled through Normandy, carrying both rations and reassurance. Those machines proved something no ideology ever could, that the true measure of power is not the capacity to take life, but the capacity to sustain it. And so, the story of the ice cream at the front, that small, almost absurd miracle in the midst of slaughter, endures as a symbol of civilization's defiance. It reminds us that even in war's darkest hours, humanity can refuse to surrender its simple joys, that mercy can travel in a truck, that the taste of sweetness, against all odds, can still reach the front line. And perhaps that is why those German prisoners stared so long at the sight. Not in envy, but in recognition. Because in that moment, they saw what the future would belong to. A world sustained not by conquest, but by supply.